Good morning or good afternoon to you, depending on where you are. Welcome to the first webinar in season 3 of our asset management webinar series. I'm delighted to be kicking this off today. This season is focusing on exploring how we help clients manage and improve resilience, decarbonisation, and the energy transition that we're seeing across the globe. I'm working with asset management and our clients' organizations, asset management capabilities to enable that to happen. I've thrown up on the screen here the webinars that we've got coming through to the beginning of 2022. So please look out for that on our website. The link is at the bottom, and on social media. And please make every effort to attend. There's some very interesting speakers from across the globe. Today, really, I want to I really want today to start this as an overview and introduction for the season, walk through how we are working with clients today in applying asset management principles and practices, helping to improve resilience, well-being, and starting to think about how we enable our clients to either demonstrate how they're meeting equity goals or actually improving on how they're meeting equity goals with the services they provide. These topics, of course, are very relevant today. They're increasingly relevant as we look forwards to the infrastructure needs for tomorrow and the future. And importantly for our clients, it's really helping them think about where they make investments in assets. And so as we start to help our clients with that decision making, obviously that can result in an increase in design and planning and other work for organizations like WSP. I wanted to really start with some basics though, get back to basics, remind you what asset management is. I know some of you have heard that before, and then we'll move into just touch on these other subjects and just talk a little about how the interface between these subjects and asset management. And as I said, the webinar series will pick up on this more so in the coming months. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's start with that reminder on asset management. And as I've said in previous webinars, despite the modern definitions of asset management being around now for several decades, there's still this widely held view that we're talking about maintenance or maintenance plus. And I generally refer to that as managing assets. So making sure we fix something and fix it better and make sure we've got that level of reliability. That, of course, is not asset management. Asset management is very much more than this. It's the practices related to extracting value from our assets. So by that, I mean identifying the value proposition, understanding the goals and objectives of the organization, identifying the asset level of service, and then from that customer level of service, starting to identify the strategies that we need to put in place to deliver that very technical level of service, and thinking about those strategies throughout the life cycle, through the planning, design, use, the operations, the maintenance, and ultimately the replacement and disposal of assets. So as we start to look at some of the things we're going to be talking about today, things like decarbonisation, thinking about environmental impact, etc., we can shape those objectives of the organization. We can put in place those metrics for environmental impact, for social impact, and start to utilize that as a means of steering how we invest in our assets throughout their life cycle. For critical and social infrastructure, the main client base of WSP, the value proposition is typically represented by services to society. So that's important we think about that, and how we define that customer level of service then helps us to define the asset performance necessary to deliver that service. But as I've just said, if we start to shape that customer level of service to consider things like equity, to consider things like environmental impact, then that in turn starts to shape our asset life cycle and our technical level of service that we expect from our assets. The international standard for asset management, ISO 55001, summarizes this concept as a line of sight. It's a concept that sits actually within all of the management system standards. But for those that are involved with the service and provision of assets, and I would count all of our clients in that mix, ISO 55001 becomes very relevant as we start to think about creating that line of sight from organization goals and objectives, from that overall value proposition, down to what do we do with assets throughout their life cycle. Just to give you an example of that, and I think I've used this before in one or two conversations, but here's an example of some work we've done fairly recently with MBTA in Boston in the United States, working with them to develop their strategic asset management plan and their transit asset management plan that were both aligned to the Focus 40 strategic plan, which documents the long-term objectives and goals of the agency and addresses how that agency is going to serve the Commonwealth over the next 20 years. So we've got a plan there that looks at demographics, looks at equity, looks at the environmental impact, and states quite clearly some of the goals and aspirations of the agency. And then in the middle there, we've got that strategic asset management plan that says, and this is what we're going to do with our assets to enable us to achieve those goals and aspirations. And then on the right-hand side there, we have a plan that says, and over the next 5 years, this is how we're going to shape our capital program to stand us in a good position for achieving that longer term plan. So it's important as we start to think about this that we're looking at that connectivity. And of course, for those of you that are in the United States, as we know right now, federal funding requires you to have an asset management plan in place, regardless of whether you're in highways, the transit agencies, and actually now being extended to other areas, including water utilities. So the concept of an asset management plan is definitely increasing in terms of importance. So while there is that that mandatory requirement within the US and within certain market segments in the US, there is, of course, across the globe, similar mandatory requirements in other markets, but there's also a growing understanding that having an asset management plan in place enables risks to be addressed, enables investments to be justified, and enables us to plan to meet future needs in a much more transparent way. So being future ready, and we talk about future ready a lot within WSP, but to me, being future ready is about designing with tomorrow's infrastructure needs in mind. And if we're going to do that, then we've got to put in place that plan that enables us to address those infrastructure needs and align those infrastructure needs to the organization's goals and objectives. We have to help shape those goals and objectives. We have to work with clients to shape that, but we also have to drive that through into their plans for their assets. So as we start to think about asset management, it's both about understanding the asset capabilities, the risks, the vulnerabilities, and putting in place plans to prepare that, but also very broadly within our client organizations, thinking about the context and how we operate those assets, including our interfaces with climate change, social justice, societal health, etc., and thinking about the organization itself and the tools that it puts in place to enable it to achieve that. What I want to do now is just quickly skip through a couple of examples of where we've provided this type of support, where we've provided this connection between some of these challenges that we're seeing today through to how agencies, organizations, corporations are managing their assets. So the first example I want to give you here is with MARTA, which is the transit agency in the Atlanta area of the United States. And with MARTA, we worked with them to showcase how you would mitigate climate change risks and integrate resilience into asset management planning. This work was really done across the entire network, where we undertook vulnerability assessments as part of their asset management planning and programming capability, and introduced indexes that highlighted the risks that their assets would be exposed to for things like flooding and other longer term changes to climate, and how that should then shape their life cycle strategies for their assets, and ultimately where they're making investments today, shaping the design criteria for those investments so that it is able to withstand a different level of climate interaction with the asset. So quite clearly a good example there of where we've taken some of the concepts of asset management and started to integrate into that the challenges that are associated with longer term climate change and the vulnerabilities that these assets have. Another example that I have here is work with King County Metro, thinking about equity and social justice. King County have done a fair amount of work thinking about this. They have an established fair and just ordinance, which they put in place in 2010. And the county's strategic plan identifies specific actions to meet 14 determinants of equity, which are, as they describe, the conditions that each of us need to thrive. In 2017, King County's Water and Land Resource Division launched an equity and social justice map, and we've started to look at how you can utilize this to drive changes to, or prioritize, let's say, capital investment in the asset management programs, in particular the capital programs regarding the transit systems in the King County region. And this has really started to then help them focus on where they make energy transition, for example, the move to electric vehicle fleets, where they focus that effort in a timely fashion, and where it will have the most impact. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But this overall concept is now really only just starting to be integrated into their overall asset management planning. And we've seen on the back of this effort, other agencies, including the likes of MBTA, really starting to think now about how they can embrace determinants of equity, metrics related to equity, to support prioritization of capital investment, and to help justify and demonstrate transparency in where investment is being made and what that impact will be on the communities in which our clients serve. I talked a little bit then about the switch to EV and the impact on health within the region, and this slide just talks that a little bit more. Asset management can have a very positive influence on health and well-being. And by well-being, I don't just mean mental and physical health, but I'm also thinking about environmental well-being, which of course can have an impact on one's health as well. So I'll give you two viewpoints here. And the first is the more obvious one, I've just touched on it, which is related to the services we provide, or the services our clients provide. So through a focus on risk, we can improve the safe use and resilience of assets. And through good planning, we can improve access to services and opportunities, whether it's transit services to community facilities like schools and healthcare and such what, or whether it's to enable improved financial well-being through access to jobs. We've also been able to, as I was indicating just a moment ago, focus our investments on assets to reduce environmental impact. So that obviously positively supports health. So for example, in King County, thinking about targeted deployment of electric bus fleets to network areas with the poorest air quality. A change actually in the planned deployment of the EV fleet from where they were going, which was deploying it into some of the more affluent areas of the region, but changing that to focus on having a very positive and very significant impact on the air quality within the region by deploying that fleet in some of the less affluent areas. The second angle that I take with this positive sort of impact that asset management has on well-being is not always considered, but I do think it's important to consider. And I have a slight glitch in my slide here, so you'll have to bear with me as I read through it. The second opportunity really is related to the management systems that we put in place and how we can support our staff within our client organizations to have a more positive experience as an employee of those organizations. One of the things that we've seen, there is a growing body of research that suggests well-being within the workplace can be improved through a management systems approach. And so by establishing programs of work to put in place management systems to control risk, to have plans that are in place so we understand the expectation, we can improve predictability, results in a much more positive workplace experience. And that in itself can lead to an increase in health and well-being, particularly for our employees. So two aspects are contrasting very much so, one focused on societal well-being, one more so on employee well-being. And I apologize that animation didn't work. I do want to touch as well on economic growth. Obviously, any level of economic growth has a financial impact and a financial well-being impact on the communities that we serve. We're seeing a stronger appetite in government spending through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in the United States, and we're seeing similar acts across the globe. So there's a real interest in spurring on economic growth across the globe now as part of recovery. I've touched on this last year that we should be focusing on not just the short-term shovel-ready, but thinking about the medium-term, the planning-ready projects, and also longer-term, investing now in the capabilities of the future. I was pleased to see one particular consultancy in the UK announcing that they were investing in jobs for the future, and I think that's something that we need to be doing more of as a society, as on a whole. I do want to just touch on ESG. ESG is a growing market across the globe right now. There is a huge amount of sustainable investment available, a strong appetite for this. I'll touch on that on the next slide. And we are seeing with that appetite for sustainable investment, a real growth in clients trying to understand how they can better manage risks, how they can operate safer and more sustainable assets, and how they can demonstrate this through a high degree of transparency and justification in their decision making. All of those factors, of course, lead to stronger ESG benchmarks, which make them more attractive for sustainable investment. The way that we see approaching this from the clients that we work with is very much helping them to improve their asset management capabilities by connecting what they do on a day-to-day basis through to their organization's goals and objectives, undertaking that capability assessment, driving that improvement program, and then focusing on, as an output of that program, those key outcomes on the right-hand side, including risk management, including improved use of resources and reduction of water and energy, etc. Those are the types of programs that we've been working on, changing those programs so that they can focus on some more of these program outcomes is a natural course, a natural evolution for the type of work that we've been doing with agencies in the last decade as we look forwards to the next decade and the challenges and opportunities that we have coming our way. So just to wrap things up, key takeaways, I did want to close with some thoughts on the relevance of asset management here to our critical and social infrastructure markets. What we're seeing today, as I said, is a strong appetite for sustainable projects. That's great. We've seen that over the last couple of years, a 42% increase in sustainable investment. We've seen over the last decade, 20-fold increase in government support for sustainable investment. So anything that our clients can do to help drive that justification and that transparency in their decision making, in my opinion, comes down to making sure they've got a strong line of sight from where they're setting those goals and objectives for their organization, where they're setting those targets for their customer services and environmental goals and equity goals, and then demonstrating how they can achieve that with their asset strategies and asset plans. When you think about the environment, when you think about the challenges that have been placed in front of us with COP26, 70% of the globe's greenhouse gas emissions come from infrastructure. So how we address that, how we manage that comes down to our strategies for our assets. So it's important that we're thinking about that interface today. If we want to make those impacts over the next decade, we need to think today about how we're changing our asset lifecycle strategies. We've got to start thinking more resilience. We've got to be embracing climate risk into our risk assessments for our assets and thinking about those vulnerabilities as part of our planning process. And we do need to be thinking about social and corporate governance and thinking about the impact that we're having on our societies. All of this comes down to the decisions that we're making today with our assets, our life cycle strategies, our plans, how we put those plans into action, and what we deliver over the next decade will have a huge impact on what we leave for future generations. So that's the kickoff for this season 3. Little bit longer, a couple of glitches. I hope we manage to resolve those glitches over the next series of webinars. And with that, I will open this up for questions for the next 7 or 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chris, for a fantastic presentation. So before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform. And also you can download the PDF version of the presentation from the handout box on the dashboard. I will start with the first question. You touched on ESG. If you can elaborate, please, more on this and what are the opportunities related to it?
Certainly, yeah. So as I was mentioning just then on the last slide, I'll just bring that up for context. There is a huge increase in interest from sustainable investors in where they can invest in opportunities and projects that will deliver positive outcomes that positively impact the environment. And of course, when you look at some of the critical infrastructure that we work with, there are many market segments where that transit, for example, a clear opportunity for attracting sustainable investment. It's a market segment that it enables equity within the communities it serves. It can positively impact the environment by reducing, greenhouse gas emissions with the cars that we can take off the streets, as well as we start to think about the energy transition, starting to introduce new types of fleet, new types of transit services that can have a huge impact on the environmental impact within the communities that they're serving. So there is some real opportunities there. ESG as a metric really comes down to assessing an organization around a series of standards that are still evolving. But what we've seen with those standards is that they're very much focused on an organizational view of how decisions are being made, where investments are being made, how is the organization structured to ensure that positive impact on environment, equity, etc., are being included within their decision-making frameworks. And given that most of the opportunities, and certainly the clients that we work with, rely so heavily on their assets to deliver their services, even a manufacturing facility relies heavily on assets to deliver its services. It's common sense that we would want to ensure that our approach to managing those assets is a clear part of an ESG framework.
Thank you. There is a question here actually about the slide with the animation that was not working. If you can walk us through what you were planning to present.
I sort of did. So I can. So the animation that wasn't working. This slide talked about the improvements to societal well-being. The other aspect that I was referring to, which is hidden behind that graphic on the right-hand side, is the improvements to employee well-being. So I mentioned the fact that when we look at how we can positively impact employee well-being, workplace well-being, one of the key areas, and there's a growing body of research that suggests this, one of the key areas that we can do, remove the stress from the workplace, and that comes from establishing management systems, putting in place controls, not putting in place red tape, not putting in place bureaucracy, putting in place controls, and ensuring that where individuals are managing risk, and it's the risks that keep them awake at night, they've got that ability to share that risk within the organization. There is better planning, or from better planning, there's better predictability, a reduction in risk. And so those types of aspects, which are very key parts to an asset management program: plans, reducing risk, management control. Those key aspects can also have a very positive impact on employee well-being.
Thank you. Can you explain us a bit more about the project where you work with equity for a client? I think you mentioned Kings County.
So with King County, we did touch on equity. We've not taken it to the extent that we would have liked. We've now picked this up again with MBTA, building on what we've done with King County. With MBTA, what we're looking to do is as follows. We are working with them on their capital needs inventory, so understanding what their overall capital need is based on the state of the asset, based on the alignment of their asset to their strategic goals, etc. We are bringing into that a program of prioritization, so understanding where they should be making those investments first. And to support that prioritization effort, we've just kicked off, literally within the last month, an effort to review all of the projects against a equity assessment framework. So we're in the process of building that equity assessment framework. And that framework is measuring projects against a series of metrics that look at the impact of that project on equity within the community. So it's thinking about the safety and the efficiency of transportation. It's thinking about where projects have a particularly strong economic development for an underrepresented region. It's thinking about where projects maybe enable better, maybe a safer, maybe a more reliable service, or maybe a better connected service to community social infrastructure like schools, like hospitals, etc. It's also looking at environmental impact. So it's thinking about how we make things more healthy. So things like, as I was talking about before, as an example, a switch to electric vehicles within areas where we've got poor air quality, for example, would be an example of that. But that work is just kicking off, really. And MBTA, I think King County were the first to say, hey, we do need to think about this. We'd started to think about it, but the program did not give time to fully embed it within the capital planning process. But MBTA, I would say, are one of the first agencies who have said, we definitely need to include this in our capital planning process. And I think, I'm proud that we're part of that story.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our webinar session. Chris, if you can just go to the last slide with your contact details. So please feel free to follow up directly with Chris via the contact details that are now showing on the screen. I would like to thank all attendees for joining today, and congratulations again, Chris, for being the Deputy President for the Institute of Asset Management. Congratulations on the new role. And thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you, Chris, for your presentation. We hope to see you in additional webinars for the Snack series. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.